First of all, sorry for my croaky voice, there's not much I can do about it in this video. But whenever one of these videos starts with an unboxing, you know it's going to be good. And today, I promise, will not disappoint. What we've got here is an RTX 4060 Ti iGame that I got from CEX, and to my great surprise, what I got was brand new, all peels on, and judging by the PCIe fingers, has never seen a socket. This does happen from time to time. Technically they are compelled to test, but for things like CPUs for which they don't have a motherboard or a GPU that is clearly in a sealed box, they might not bother. Either way, it comes with a 2-year warranty, and for a brand new card, I can't complain. From a technical perspective, it's big, like all 4000 series, probably unnecessarily large, and it has also a gimmicky turbo button on the back, the most useless dual BIOS switch I've ever encountered. My advice is to turn it on and forget it exists. Now that we have that out of the way, let's look at the rest of the components that are going to be featured here. A brand new Ryzen 5 5600 tray, I got a bunch of this in a deal a while back and I'm making my way through them. A 32GB kit, a brand new 3200 Mbps RAM, which I have since changed for a white version as I got that delivered, and an MSI No3's B450 motherboard with an universal shield. The reason for the B450 instead of a B550, I must admit, did come down to the price point I wanted to hit with this PC. The truth of the matter is that it simply won't make a difference if a Ryzen 5 5600 is on an X370, B450 or top of the line X570S, the actual performance will be within margin of error. Thankfully, that will also be the case with something like 5700 or 5800 X3D, but not necessarily the 16-core 5950X, which in my opinion, if all you're doing is gaming, that's not the chip for you. So it's kind of a moot point anyway, I guess. The only bummer is that it does not have 5V ARGB, which means I'm stuck opting for a separate controller, although I will be using one with a remote. While I'm fiddling about with the cooler trying to decide if there is enough space to make it a push-pull, I think I need to fess up something about the fans. The 3 RGB fans in the front of the case are mostly for show. There aren't really any ventilation holes in the front of the case apart from a small slot at the bottom, so they won't be doing much, if anything at all, apart from looking all shiny. So the heavy lifting airflow wise is being handled by 2 low profile Arctic fans that I have secured to the top of the case where most of the air will be drawn in from. Initially I did put the fan that came with the case on the AIO, but quickly changed my mind about it. Even though it was adequate, after 45 minutes of Cinebench the radiator was getting a bit too toasty for my liking and the CPU was sitting around 71C, signaling that I am probably leaving a bit of performance on the table. So I went ahead and swapped around the fans with one at the front, for which I connected to the AIO, and presto, all is well and 10C cooler. I would like to spend some time talking about the RAM in detail, but that would make the video way too long, so the brief is that this is 3200 Mbps JDEC RAM with CL32. If all of this sounds horrible for gaming, well, it is, but the crucial thing is that it is running at 1.2 volts. Now, all DDR4 without exception is 100% safe for daily usage up to about 1.45 volts, so you can see there is ridiculous amount of non-XMP tweaking available. Every kit will be different naturally, but so far every single one I have from this brand hit 3600 Mbps CL18 without any fuss whatsoever at below 1.35 volts, usually 1.28 to 1.32. When I ordered the first kit I was skeptical how well it would perform, but after using a few I am completely sold. If there are any better bang for the buck 32GB DDR4 brand new kits out there, I have yet to see them. And finally back to the GPU, and a bit of hilarity while I tried to put it in. I did anticipate this might be a problem, so when I first unboxed this brand new Vida Apollo case, the first thing I did is I put a fan in the front and measured the 4060 Ti against it. It does fit, as you can see, but only with the slightest of clearances at the front. And now that everything is in hooked up, let's give it its first boot. In order to sync up the fans, all you have to do is hold the reset button for 3 seconds, and unless you take the power cord out, it should never desync. And it should play nice with the included controller that has loads of modes, but as usual all I care about is static white. And now that we're at the end of the building phase, I realized I didn't even touch on the PSU or the storage. Well, never mind, those aren't really important for gaming performance, so I went with a fairly unexciting 700W brand new PSU, a 1TB SSD and a 2TB hard drive. Before we deep dive into the benchmarks, I like to make two things clear. One, all the benchmarks in this session are done at 4040p because if you buy a £350 card to run it on a 1080p monitor, you are doing it wrong. Considering the inexpensive 4040p monitors are around the £140 mark on Amazon, I don't see any good reason to limit ourselves to 1080p. And the second thing is that all the benchmarks have been recorded internally using Shadowplay. Yes, that affects the frame rate negatively. In this particular benchmark we are looking at around 9.8 FPS lower on average with recording on, but then again I see this as a valid use case. If you buy this PC you should expect to be able to game and stream at the same time without compromises. So please bear in mind that all results shown today will be higher with just gaming. So what about Heaven? Well, this is a pure Rasta benchmark, and while the GPU does fine with 156.8 FPS on average and 166.6 FPS without recording, it's in about the same ballpark as a vanilla 3070, so not bad at all. Next is 3D Mark, and after running a series of Speedway stress tests, all I can say that this is one of the most impressive GPUs I've ever had when it comes to a core to hotspot delta. Even on water cooling, this sort of delta is very hard to achieve. The keen-eyed amongst you might have noticed in the stats panel I have added a new counter that shows the GPU hotspot, and here it hovers around 6 to 7C, which is insanely good. Anything under 10C is exceptional, 10 to 12 is good, 12 to 15 is adequate, and anything above 15 and below 20 is probably in need of attention. Over 20, it means that there is poor contact and the car should be serviced as soon as possible. This will vary depending on the amount of power drawn, but in this case, even with a rather aggressive overclock, the largest delta I ever saw was 10.5C. Rocket League is the first proper game we will be taking a look at, and it's surprising that it's some sort of bottleneck here. I'm really not sure what that might be. I think it's just the game's quirks that keep the utilization under 100% on the GPU, alongside the lower than expected power draw. Is this a problem? Well, no, not at all. We are still getting way north of 250 FPS, so the gameplay experience is super smooth. Fornite does about as well as I expected with 60 FPS on average, 1440p epic while streaming. Again, I suspect that this isn't by chance, as it is a highly tuned game for this GPU. That being said, it's up to you how you want to play. Drop even too high and you are well north of 100 FPS instantly, so I guess it's individual preference. I know a lot of people even on very high-end hardware play on performance mode for whatever reason. Next up, our first AAA game, Horizon Zero Dawn. Yes, it is an older title, but it still looks very good, and with performance and features to match. It did set DLSS at quality, but truth be told, even if you run it without or set to ultra performance, you won't see a difference. Why? Well, because the game is a bit of a CPU hog. While not great, it's still very much acceptable from a gameplay perspective, as the frame times are buttery smooth alongside 98 FPS on average. Next, we are going to be looking at Horizon Forbidden West, the sequel to Zero Dawn and a much newer game with significantly upgraded graphics. Unfortunately, still quite new and the developers haven't quite worked out the quirks, so I'm expecting the performance to only improve, so please take this as a preview what 4000 series cards can do. With DLSS enabled but without frame generation at 1440p, sorry for the funky aspect ratio by the way, I don't know what happened there, we are getting 63 FPS on average. But enable frame generation and all of a sudden the FPS jumps to 94. Yes, I know a lot of people still aren't sold on frame generation, but in single player I find it acceptable. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider we get a very respectable 109 FPS on average and the game is super smooth. Can't shake the feeling that even though the turbo button is still very much engaged, the GPU has so much more it can give, so I put a mild overclock on and rerun the benchmark. I only did it through Afterburner, but I think it would be easier and better if you decide to use the OC scanner. The average FPS jumped from 109 to a whopping 112 while consuming an extra 35 to 40 watts. And no, I don't really get it either. Control is an older title, but still one that heavily relies on RT technology to the point where if you turn off you lose a lot of the atmosphere that makes this game so special. Now it won't have the latest DLSS tech, but even by comparison, quote-unquote brute forcing it, which is ironic considering it's still doing its upscaling thing, would still get 71 FPS on average with a very smooth frame time graph. Assassin's Creed Valhalla without any resolution scaling runs about as well as you'd expect with 84 FPS on average. I've ranted at length about this game in the past. Ubisoft is good enough in making it super playable on lower end hardware but somehow struggles with the mid-range. In any event, for a single player exploration game it is more than adequate, but I still can't shake the feeling it could be better. Farcry 6 was always going to be bottlenecked by the CPU. In order to not be here, we need something like the 5800 X3D or 13th gen i7, which frankly doesn't really make much sense with the new mid-range GPU. Again, the saving grace is that the frame time is super duper stable and the gameplay experience is great. This is a good game, I would say, to crank up the resolution to 4K, might as well. And what of the average FPS? Well, it's at 69 and I'll leave it at that. And finally Cyberpunk. In this case, because it is the most mature game on the list that supports DLSS 3 frame generation, we will be looking at it without it enabled. The frame pacing and the average are both acceptable 49.5 FPS on average at the end of the benchmark, but let's face it, it's not an ideal gaming experience. Even if with ray tracing set to ultra, it looks absolutely fabulous. Flip frame generation on though, and it all changes, and it changes dramatically. The frame times graph instantly becomes even smoother due to the extra inserted frames that keep it consistent, and the average, well, that simply skyrockets to 81.61 FPS. That is pushing right past the 3080, and subjectively it feels just as good if not a bit better. Like everyone else, I was initially skeptical of frame generation when it was announced, being afraid that it would be something akin to the motion smoothing on TVs that is so objectively dreadful. But that is not what it is, not at all. The whole concept is a lot closer to the DLSS tech it shares a naming scheme with. It is another tool that helps keep the player immersed in the game. Personally, I'm not even that bothered about very high frame rates, happily playing on a 120Hz monitor, but frame time pacing issues really annoy me, and anything that can get rid of those excursions is welcome in my book. And that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it and see you in the next one.